David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Chapter 37, A Little Cold Water. My new life had lasted for more than a week, and I was stronger than ever in those tremendous practical resolutions that I felt the crisis required. As yet, little Dora was quite unconscious of my desperate firmness otherwise than as my letters darkly shadowed it forth. But another Saturday came, and on that Saturday evening she was to be at Miss Mill's. And when Mr. Mills had gone to his whist club, telegraphed to me in the street by a bird cage in the drawing-room middle window, I was to go there to tea. Dora came to the drawing-room door to meet me, and Jip came scrambling out, tumbling over his own growls, under the impression that I was a bandit, and we all three went in as happy and loving as could be. I soon carried desolation into my bosom of our joys. Not that I meant to do it, but that I was so full of the subject by asking Dora without the smallest preparation if she could love a beggar. My pretty little startled Dora, her only association with the word was a yellow face and a nightcap on a pair of crutches, or a wooden leg, or a dog with a decanter stand in his mouth, or something of that kind, and she stared at me with a most delightful wonder. "How can you ask me anything so foolish?" pouted Dora. "Love a beggar?" "Dora, my own dearest," said I am a beggar." "How can you be such a silly thing?" replied Dora, slapping my hand. "As to sit there and telling such stories. I'll make Jip bite you." Her childish way was the most delicious way in the world to me, but it was necessary to be explicit, and I solemnly repeated, "Dora, my own life, I am your ruined David." "I declare I'll make Jip bite you," said Dora, shaking her curls, if you are so ridiculous." But I looked so serious that Dora left off shaking her curls and laid her trembling little hand upon my shoulder, and first looked scared and anxious, and then began to cry. That was dreadful. I fell upon my knees before the sofa, caressing her and imploring her not to rend my heart. But for some time poor little Dora did nothing but exclaim, "Oh dear, oh dear." And oh, she was so frightened. And where was Julia Mills? And oh, take her to Julia Mills and go away, please, until I was almost beside myself. At last, after an agony of supplication and protestation, I got Dora to look at me with a horrified expression of face, which I gradually soothed until it was only loving and her soft, pretty cheek was lying against mine. Then I told her, with my arms clasped around her, how I loved her so dearly, and how I felt it right to offer to release her from her engagement, because now I was poor. How I never could bear it or recover it if I lost her. How I had no fears of poverty if she had none. My arm being nerved and my heart inspired by her, I was already working with a courage such as none but lovers know. How I had begun to be practical and to look into the future. How a crust of well-earned was sweeter far than a feast inherited, and much more to the same purpose, which I delivered in a burst of passionate eloquence, quite surprising to myself, though I had been thinking about it day and night ever since my aunt had astonished me. "Is your heart still mine, dear Dora?" I said rapturously, for I knew by her clinging to me that it was. "Oh, yes," cried Dora. "Oh, yes, it's all yours. Oh, don't be dreadful." I dreadful to Dora? "Don't talk about being poor and working hard," said Dora, nestling closer to me. "Oh, don't. "My dearest love," said I. "The crust well earned." "Oh, yes, but I don't want to hear any more about crusts," said Dora. "And Jip must have mutton chop every day at 12, or he'll die." I was charmed by her childish, winning way. I fondly explained to Dora that Jip should have his mutton chop and be accustomed regularly. I drew a picture of our frugal home, made independent by my labor, sketching in the little house I had seen at Highgate, and my aunt in her room upstairs. "Am I not dreadful now, Dora?" I said tenderly. "Oh, no," cried Dora. "But I hope your aunt will keep in her own room a good deal, and I hope she is not a scolding old thing." If it were possible for me to love Dora more than ever, I am sure I did. But I became grave and said, "My own, may I mention something?" "Oh, please don't be practical," said Dora coaxingly, "because it frightens me so." "Sweetheart," I returned, "there is nothing to alarm you in all this. I want you to think of it quite differently. I want to make it nerve you and inspire you, Dora." "Oh, but that's so shocking," cried Dora. "My love, no. Perseverance and strength of character will enable us to bear much worse things." "But I haven't got any strength at all," said Dora, shaking her curls. "Have I, Jip? Oh, do kiss Jip and be agreeable." It was impossible to resist kissing Jip when she held him up to me for that purpose, putting her own bright rosy little mouth into kissing form as she directed the operation, which she insisted should be performed symmetrically on the center of his nose. I did as she bade me, rewarding myself afterwards for my obedience, and she charmed me out of my graver character for I don't know how long. "But Dora, my beloved," said I, at last resuming it, "I was going to mention something. The judge of the prerogative court might have fallen in love with her, to see her fold her little hands and hold them up, begging and praying me not to be dreadful any more." "Indeed, I am not going to be, my darling," I assured her. "But Dora, my love, if you will sometimes think, not despondently, you know, far from that, but if you will sometimes think, just to encourage yourself, that you are engaged to a poor man—" Don't, pray don't," cried Dora. "It is so very dreadful." "My soul, not at all," I said cheerfully. "If you will sometimes think of that, and look about now and then at your papa's housekeeping, and endeavour to inquire a little habit of accounts, for instance." Poor little Dora received this suggestion with something that was half a sob and half a scream. "It would be so useful to us afterwards," I went on. "And if you would promise me to read a little cookery book that I would send you, it would be so excellent for both of us, for our path in life, my Dora," I said, warming with the subject, "is stony and rugged now, and it rests with us to smooth it. We must fight our way onward. We must be brave. There are obstacles to be met, and we must meet and crush them." I was going on at a great rate, with a clenched hand and a most enthusiastic countenance. But it was quite unnecessary to proceed. I had said enough. I had done it again. Oh, she was so frightened. Oh, where was Julia Mills? Oh, take her to Julia Mills and go away, please. So that, in short, I was quite distracted and raved about the drawing-room. At first, Miss Mills thought it was a quarrel, and that we were verging on the desert of the Sahara, but she soon found out how matters stood. For my dear, affectionate little Dora, embracing her, began exclaiming that I was a poor laborer, and then cried for me and embraced me, and asked me would I let her give me all her money to keep, and then fell on Miss Mill's neck, sobbing as if her tender heart were broken. Miss Mills must have been born to be a blessing to us. She ascertained from me in a few words what it was all about, comforting Dora, and gradually convinced her that I was not a laborer. When we were quite composed, and Dora had gone upstairs to put some rose water on her eyes, Miss Mills rang for tea. After tea we had the guitar, and Dora sang those same dear old French songs about the impossibility of ever on any account leaving off dancing, la ra la ra la, until I felt a much greater monster than before. We had only one check to our pleasure, and that happened a little while before I took my leave, when Miss Mills, chancing to make some allusion to tomorrow morning, I was unlucky to let out that being obliged to exert myself now, I got up at 5 o'clock. Whether Dora had any idea that I was a private watchman, I am unable to say, but it made a great impression on her, and she neither played nor sang any more. It was still on her mind when I bade her adieu, and she said to me, in her pretty, coaxing way, as if I were a doll, I used to think, "Now don't get up at 5 o'clock, you naughty boy. It's so nonsensical." "My love," said I have work to do." "But don't do it," returned Dora. "Why should you?" It was impossible to say to the sweet little surprised face otherwise than lightly and playfully that we must work to live. "Oh, how ridiculous!" cried Dora. "How shall we live without Dora?" said I. "How, anyhow?" said Dora. She seemed to think she had quite settled the question, and gave me such a triumphant little kiss, direct from her innocent heart, that I would hardly have put her out of conceit with her answer for a fortune. Well, I loved her, and I went on loving her, most absorbingly, entirely and completely. But going on, too, working pretty hard and busily, keeping red hot all the irons I now had in the fire, I would sit sometimes of a night opposite my aunt, thinking of how I had frightened Dora that time, and how I could best make my way with a guitar case through the forest of difficulty, until I used to fancy that my head was turning quite gray. And that is the end of chapter 37.